figure out some of these trades, not just who's going where and for whom, but why. What about the contractual ramifications? Our next guest is just a master of that stuff. I don't know if there's anybody better at it. We welcome back to the show ESPN NBA front office analyst, former NBA front office analyst. And I remember he actually interviewed to be the assistant GM of the Kings once, and I think he said, yeah, I'm good. Bobby Marks with us. How are you, Bobby?
I'm good, guys. How we doing?
Good. We're doing fine. Before we get started, could you tell us, because it's the holiday season, I know some people looking at, dogs and puppies and things. Tell us about how important it is in your mind to go adopt rather than buy a
listen, we have a Pomeranian, which is, I guess, rare to find in the adoption world. We got her in right before COVID in 2020, and she was I called her the most expensive adoption dog just because there was so much wrong with her when we got her. And then having been involved with the local shelter down here in Southwest Florida, the cases that you see every day, sometimes the dogs look, that there are these big pit bulls and Rottweilers and all these big dogs, but they'll melt your heart and everything like that. So, yeah, I would listen. Everyone has their own choice to do whatever they want to do and how they want to spend their money, but I would say the adoption dog, you adopt a dog, they'll be at your side forever because there's so much loyalty there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Bobby. Awesome. Appreciate that. You write that Keon Ellis, I don't know how loyal the Kings are going to be to him. He may have the most trade value of any King. How much do you think the Kings might realistically get back? And I know that about how these things work, and some of this we're asking you to speculate, but what would you guess? Could they get a first-round pick for Keon? I don't think so, but what do you think?
Yeah, probably not. Yeah. I mean, if it is, it would have to be somewhat of a protection, and it's somewhere in the 20. If it gets to the 20s, I would say probably unlikely here, just because he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. But whoever gets him in a trade has his bird rights, which means they can exceed the salary cap to re-sign him. So that does give you somewhat of an advantage here. So yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the roster from whether it be Zach or DeMar or Domas, just based on those three guys making north of $20 million, and you have a guy on Keon on a really good contract and a good number here, he just kind of fits easier than one of those other three players do. So I think if you're looking at multiple seconds, you certainly would want something good. For example, New York's got multiple good Washington seconds. Those almost equate to kind of a late first-round pick as far as where you see the Wizards are. So I do think, the goal is if you're going to move him, which you probably would because you're unlikely going to probably sign him, then you are looking for something good in value. And I know second-round picks don't move the needle, but, there are teams, listen, Golden State drafted Draymond Green with a second, and that pick was acquired in a prior trade. So, yeah, I think it probably starts with him, and I think he's probably the easiest out of the players to move off of.
Bobby Marks joining us this afternoon on The Drive, guys. Yeah, from one of the easiest guys to move off of to probably one of the more difficult in Zach LaVine, just with that hefty contract, Bobby. Can you see any scenario, even if it is towards the end of the trade deadline, where they could get him out of here?
I couldn't hear you that well. It was kind of like really faint in there. Were you talking regarding Zach or Doma?
Zach LaVine, yeah, just with the hefty contract.
Is it easier to move than Chicago did? I know he was traded to Sacramento last year, and there was a point where we probably didn't think that the LaVine number would go off the board, and he did. It's $47-48 million. Got a player option for next year. I said it on TV yesterday. Does he make sense for a team like the Clippers? I think it would be more appealing to teams like the Clippers who don't control their first-round pick for the next 4 years. Same with Milwaukee, who are basically kind of in a similar position where most of their first-round picks are out or their swap rights there where you're looking for a player that can try to help you. I do think you're probably looking at expirings that are coming back. So if the goal is just to get his number off, which I would think he would probably opt into that number next year, which is right around 50, that's probably what the price tag is for a guy like Zach LaVine. I always say, there's never say never on trades. I think players are probably grouped in different tiers. And I think it's based on circumstances here. And I think that there's teams out there looking for a guy that can give you 20, 21 points a game, and you're willing to absorb that number next year and it doesn't impact you significantly, then I think it's certainly worth something to consider.
Bobby Marks with us, ESPN NBA front office analyst. This may be a leading question. I don't mean it to be, Bobby, but are the Kings close to being in a situation where they almost have to move some of these contracts, which then decreases their value because other teams know that you almost have to move them?
Yeah, I mean, I always say what you want to do is you want to control the noise and kind of make it not seem like there's, I don't want to say dysfunction, but that you're basically going to be in sell mode here, where it does decrease the value of maybe some of what your players are. Certainly, maybe a player like Sabonis here, when you're 6-20 and you have the second worst record in the Western Conference, and you have the second worst. I think they have the second worst point differential among teams. Yeah, I mean, teams kind of smell blood in the water a little bit as far as where you are, and especially where you have your own pick this year, and probably the goal is to get the best, be in the best spot to draft one of these players in a really good draft here. Teams do look at trying to devalue where they are, maybe lowballing hit here. I do think there is there's a different market in late December than where it might be in early February, because I do think when you get, as I always say, deadlines create kind of desperation, where people are in the standings. Someone in the standings right now, might be fighting for a play-in, and 6 weeks from now, they might be a top 16. So that's why we rarely see many deals happen in December and January here. So I would. Yeah, listen, we'll monitor it. As I said, I do think where Sacramento is, I think the end goal is to try to be in a position where you're drafting one of these generational players. When in a really good draft, I mean, we're comparing this draft to the 96 draft, which was legendary. That was the Iverson draft, and then the 03 draft, which is the Carmelo, LeBron, Bosh, Wade, that draft there. I think this year's draft has the chance to be up there with that.
Bobby Marks, kind enough to join us, ESPN NBA front office analyst. You can check out his work on ESPN.com. Reading your article, obviously there is a mention of Domantas Sabonis. It's been a weird situation here with some of the injuries that he's endured during the season. There is talk that he could be, gone, but I think a lot of people think he's staying. But he's got a specific fit. I mean, he's got to probably go somewhere where they're really going to see him fitting, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think when you're talking about fit, he's certainly not your traditional center. So he's probably not for everyone. I think it's, he's got a lot of money left in a bunch of years too. Roster building in this day and age is a lot different than it was, 4 or 5 years ago here. So as you said, it all comes down to fit. Is what else is on your roster? How do you fit that number in?
Bobby, two questions, or I guess two questions in one. The Kings have a $14.1 million exception and a $5 million exception, which you wrote about. Do those carry over, and if they do, how long? And then second question is because this is something I've always wondered, with all these aprons and everything else, it feels like we're studying the cap this year compared to knowing the cap. When we're mid-season, something like now, or we get closer to the trade deadline, and say someone is on the books, I'll say, use example, DeMar DeRozan's on the books for 24 some odd million, call it $25 million, and he's traded in early February. Does that $24 million go against the cap to the new team, or is it the back half of the rest of the season that he is owed? Yeah,
that's a good question. So there's probably two ways to look at it. Once the player is traded, that number comes off your cap altogether. Then there's also the financial element. The acquiring team would be responsible to pay that player what is owed on his contract, but also absorbs the full salary cap. So if the team trades for DeMar and he's got a $25 million salary, that goes against the cap, and then they would be responsible based on whatever the days left in the season here. I think the apron, where Sacramento is, where they are with these two exceptions, as you mentioned, 14-1 and 5 and change. you were not allowed to go out and use that 14-1 because you'll exceed the apron. You're hard capped right now.
Mm-hmm.
You're $7.8 million below the first apron. Anything, any trade or signing can't leave you over that number. You are hard capped because of the Schroeder trade here. So those will go by the wayside once the season ends. It basically kind of the clock restarts in July 1st and everything here. So you're probably in a use it or lose it scenario.
Gotcha. It's questions facing every team, ESPN.com. What move should your team make? Trade questions for all 30 franchises by Bobby Marks. Definitely check it out if you haven't already. Bobby, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, take care. Yeah, there's a guy who knows a thing or two about the cap.